you really asexual if you masturbate? Can asexual people like sex? The answer might surprise you. No, it won't. The answer is yes. Yes, but we're gonna talk about it, all right? Come on. Wow! Come on. Hi everybody, my name is Catieosaurus and welcome back to my channel. Today we are gonna be talking about a topic that is not only near and dear to my heart, but it is also one that I feel like, as a certified sex educator with a special interest in neurodivergency, we don't talk nearly enough about, and that is asexuality and pleasure. Not a lot of people know this about me, but I actually identify as a person on the asexual spectrum. I am demi-gray sexual, and if you don't know what that means, that's okay. We're going to talk about that later on in the video. A lot of people are often surprised when they find that out about me. Like, you're a certified sex educator. You talk about sex all the time on the internet for your job. You have an OnlyFans. What do you mean you don't like sex? And the truth is that for me and for a lot of other asexual people, our connection with pleasure and sex and intimacy is a lot more complicated. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So the first and most important thing to understand about asexuality is that it's not a monolith. Rather, it's a big, broad umbrella that features many different ways of expressing love, expressing intimacy, and expressing sexual attraction. So let's start off with some definitions. The first definition is probably the broadest, but what is asexuality? The easiest way to define asexuality is a person who experiences little to no sexual attraction to others. Now, much like other sexual orientations, asexuality is intrinsic to who a person is. It's not a choice, and it's not a result of any physical or psychological condition. Now let's talk about me! So the term gray sexual is used to refer to a person who experiences sexual attraction, but very rarely and often under very specific circumstances. It's kind of a fluid space between asexuality and other orientations. Now, two things can be true at once, and that also goes for me. So I also want to talk about demisexuality. Demisexual people only experience sexual attraction after they form a deep bond and relationship with someone. The connection can be romantic, but it doesn't have to be. It can also be platonic. For me, this was one of the biggest hurdles that I sort of had to get over when I really started understanding my identity as an asexual person, because I would hear all the time people talking about like, oh, I have a crush on this boy, or oh, I have a crush on this celebrity, or oh, this celebrity turns me on. And I was always like, you don't know that person. You don't know anything about them. They might be a jerk. How are you gonna be sexually attracted to that person? And it turns out that's a big old flag for demisexuality. Hooray. All right, I've got a few more definitions for you, so let's keep going. Now, there's this subcategory of asexuality where a person might really enjoy having sexual fantasies, but not really want to engage in sexual acts. And that's what we call an agosexual. Similarly, there's also something called reciprosexual, which is where you might not experience sexual attraction to somebody until you know that they're sexually attracted to you. Also under the asexual spectrum is queer platonic, which is one of my favorites. This refers to relationships that are not necessarily romantic, but they do involve a deep emotional connection that goes beyond what is traditionally thought of as friendship.
Oh my God, they were roommates.
Now, obviously, there are a lot more identities that fall under the asexual umbrella, but that's a nice buffet smorgasbord, little taster platter for you. You're welcome. Now, I'm gonna admit that when I was growing up, there were not a lot of conversations about asexuality or what asexuality was. And in fact, some of the myths and stigmas that I personally believed and had been taught about asexuality were some of the biggest sort of hurdles and things that prevented me from really understanding and embracing my own asexual identity. So I want to break down the top 10 myths about asexuality today. Number one, asexuality is the same thing as celibacy or abstinence. If you're asexual, you're not having sex. And that is not true. Asexuality is a sexual orientation that is categorized by not experiencing sexual attraction. On the other hand, celibacy and abstinence, while valid choices for many people, are in fact that. They are choices. The same way that we talk about how you don't choose to be gay, you don't choose to be asexual. But a lot of asexual people may choose to have sex. Which brings me to myth number 2. Asexual people don't have sex. Not true! While some asexual people may not choose to engage in sex or intimacy, many do for many different reasons, which we're going to talk about later in the video. Myth number 3, asexuality, it means that there's something wrong with you. There's like a hormonal imbalance or like medical issue, and that's also not true. Asexuality is not a disorder. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean that you're broken. It just means that you and your sexuality are different than what is frequently represented in media and on TV, and that's okay. Number 4, I lost count. Asexual people can't form romantic relationships, and that is not true either. Asexuality only pertains to sexual attraction, not romantic attraction. They are two different things, and that's really important to remember as we go on later in this video. Asexual individuals can absolutely have romantic relationships and romantic feelings and romantic attraction. It's not the same thing as sexual attraction. All right, so this is one that I hear all the time. Oh, that asexual person just hasn't found the right partner yet. They're just waiting for the right guy to come along. They'll change their mind, and that is also not true. This is a huge misconception that absolutely invalidates asexuality as a valid sexual orientation. Asexual people don't just magically start experiencing sexual attraction once they meet the right person. Asexuality is not dependent on relationships. It is an independent thing. All right, here's another one. Asexual people are incapable of experiencing pleasure. And let me tell you firsthand, that is also not true. Asexual people can absolutely experience pleasure, and many of them have a very high sex drive. One of the things that I'm really excited to talk about today is the fact that the experience of pleasure is absolutely separate from sexual attraction. It can be enjoyed in all sorts of ways. Things like masturbation, sensual touch, intimacy, other non-sexual activities that are pleasurable. Like ice cream. Ice cream is deeply pleasurable. Mom, this one's dedicated to you. Asexuality is just a phase. Also a myth. Like every other sexual identity, asexuality, again, I'm gonna keep saying it, is absolutely valid, and it's something that is lifelong. Now, like many people, our sexualities can change and shift, and there's an element of fluidity, but it doesn't mean that asexuality is just something you're gonna magically grow out of. Something that I hear a lot is that asexual people are anti-sex, and listen, I'm the poster child for an asexual person who is deeply interested in sex, but experiencing sexual attraction is just different for me. Asexual people are not necessarily prudish. A lot of asexual people are freaky as hell, and that's also totally okay. It's also important to remember that attitudes around sex in asexual people can vary greatly. Some people are super interested in sex and the experience of sexual pleasure, and some people identify as sex repulsed, and it's something that they don't want to deal with. But again, that doesn't mean that they're prudish. That doesn't mean that they're embarrassed about it. That just means that that's their connection, and that's something that we should respect. Lastly, one that I hear all the time is, well, asexuality just isn't real. And like every other identity on the LGBTQIA spectrum, that's also not true. Asexuality is real. Science says so. Good talk. That might have only been 9 myths, but it's fine. We'll move on. So, like I said earlier, the next thing that's really important to understand about asexuality is that sexual attraction is different than romantic attraction. And that's different than emotional connection, and that's different than the physical sensation of pleasure. Make sense? Now, let's talk about it. So, first I want to start with sexual attraction. So, sexual attraction is broadly defined as finding someone sexually appealing and therefore having the desire to engage in sexual activity with. It's an emotional and psychological feeling that can basically result in a desire for sexual contact with another person. This is kind of fun. Sexual attraction can be focused towards another person, and it often is, but it can also be focused on yourself. You can find yourself sexually attractive. You can think you're sexy and be turned on by yourself. And I kind of think that's lovely. So for many people, sexual attraction is sort of the primary element of their sexual identity. But for asexual people, it's a little different because they don't experience sexual attraction in the same way that other people do. Sexual attraction can result in pleasure, but you can also sort of take the idea of pleasure or physical enjoyment out of the idea of sexual attraction and it still exists, right? Sexual attraction is here, pleasure is here. They're two different things, but they sort of coexist in some circumstances, right? So let's just talk about physical pleasure. So when I talk about pleasure, I'm referring to the actual physical response of the body to stimulation, which can be sexual or non-sexual in nature. It's a neurological response. Pleasure is a neurological response that results in feelings of enjoyment or satisfaction. It's also where like your dopamines and your serotonins and your oxytocins wind up like coming out, right? So physical pleasure is basically any sort of pleasure sensation that is experienced by your body. Again, this doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. It can be experienced through, things like eating, exercise, touch. Like you ever get a really, really good back rub? It's not necessarily sexual, but it's very, very pleasurable. So physical pleasure is not necessarily connected to the sexual attraction that you might feel towards the source of the stimulation. So for example, if my partner is giving me a really, really good back rub, right? Like just A+ back rub. Yes, I might be sexually attracted to that partner, but in that moment, the pleasure is coming from the back rub, not from the sexual attraction. Does that kind of make sense? I feel like that makes sense. So our body's response to physical pleasure is pretty much universal, regardless of who you are. And so again, when we talk about asexuality and pleasure, so again, in the context of asexuality, an asexual person might not experience sexual attraction, but they still can absolutely experience the sensations of physical pleasure. They're two very, very different things. And this idea of physical pleasure for an asexual or for frankly any other person can result from self-pleasure or pleasure with a partner or with a really good sandwich. So when we talk about asexuality, the sort of key difference here between sexual attraction and physical pleasure is that physical pleasure isn't necessarily driven by sexual attraction. It can be driven by things like a desire just to feel good, physical pleasure, for emotional closeness or intimacy or other personal reasons. I don't know, maybe really into cardio. Sex is cardio, fight me about it. All right, so we've talked about sexual attraction. We've talked about physical pleasure. And now I want to break down one more concept, which is romantic attraction, which, if you remember, is different than sexual attraction. Sexual attraction, romantic attraction. My nose is physical pleasure. So when we talk about romantic attraction, what we're talking about is fundamentally just the desire to be romantically involved with someone. Dating, partnership, marriage, that kind of thing. Romantic attraction is about wanting to experience a deep emotional connection. And it often includes the desire for romantic expressions like, holding hands, cuddling, kissing, sharing your hopes and dreams and your feelings, all of that stuff. But it's not necessarily tied to physical or sexual desire. I'm going to deviate from the script a little bit here because I think this is really important to talk about. You can be deeply in love with someone and not want to have sex with them. And that is okay. But one of the things that I think is really frustrating and really harmful for a lot of people is there's this pressure that romantic attraction and sexual attraction has to be the same thing. And I think a lot of that comes from miseducation and misrepresentation, not only in education, but also just sort of in media, right? Like you don't see a lot of movies where two people are like, meant to be together, but they don't ultimately wind up boning because sex becomes like the shorthand for that intimacy. But intimacy can be generated in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different styles that have nothing to do with sex. And placing all of your intimate value on sex can ultimately wind up hurting your relationship because now you're relying on sex to be the thing that expresses intimacy instead of things like communication and other types of physical touch and trust and romantic expression. And I don't know why I get so soapboxy about it, but it's something that's just really, really, it's my YouTube channel and I'm gonna talk about it. All right. So, okay. Maybe you or your partner or both of you are asexual. How do you navigate those conversations surrounding intimacy and maybe even sex? This is where the Catieosaurus communication speech is going to happen. So if you're new here, welcome to the party. Communication with our partners isn't just about, like, what did you do today? Or, do you like chocolate ice cream versus vanilla ice cream? It's also about expressing our boundaries and our limits and our needs and our desires. And being able to talk about that and express that is especially important for asexual individuals who might have different comfort levels when it comes to physical intimacy. In any type of relationship, but especially in a relationship where one or more partners is asexual, consent is key. Consent is a mutual agreement that always should be respected. And the other thing is that consent isn't just like a one-time thing. It's not a one-time conversation that you have. It's an ongoing, evolving, fluid conversation. And so it's perfectly okay and frankly really healthy if you go back and you revisit and renegotiate the terms of your relationship as it progresses and as you learn more about your own desires and your own needs and your own wants and all of that stuff. For asexual people in particular, navigating boundaries and setting limits and talking about desires often means setting clear expectations about what kind of intimacy you're comfortable with. Maybe you really love back rubs, but you hate cuddling. Maybe you really like hugs, but you hate kissing. Like there's a world of options here. And so being able to talk about your preferences is really, really important. In a situation like this, it's about finding a balance where both partners feel comfortable. And that's going to look different for everybody. Some partners might just be completely on board with cuddling. Others might not be. Some partners might need time limits or say, you know what, I get really overstimulated when I come home from work, but I'm happy to cuddle you later on. There are always ways that you can discuss and negotiate and figure out how to get your needs met in a relationship. And I feel like something that's also really important to stress is that when we talk about consent, oftentimes we talk about stuff that we just don't like. No, that's off the table. But sharing what you like and communicating what you do enjoy is also really important because it ensures that the relationship is going to be fulfilling and rewarding for both of you. It's not just about saying, no, I won't. It's about saying, what can we do together to share that intimacy? In particular, I think it's really important for asexual people to be able to make the distinction between sexuality and intimacy. Intimacy is a word that often gets tied to sex, but it's so much broader than that. Intimacy is about closeness. It's about sharing a connection that isn't necessarily just physical, but emotional as well. And for asexual people, that is often the cornerstone of their relationships. Intimacy is about feeling, understood and valued and appreciated and seen in your relationships. And in a relationship where one or more partners is asexual, it's really important to be able to have that intimacy and create that intimacy and sustain that intimacy without feeling like there is that pressure to have sex. That sexual attraction and sexual intimacy has to happen in order for the relationship to be fulfilling. Lastly, it's important to remember that pleasure can be an adventure that you go on either solo or with a partner. Many asexual people absolutely enjoy the sensation of sex or masturbation, but without that physical attraction or intimacy component. Here are some reasons why. So the first one is easy: physical pleasure. Sex, masturbation feels good, and it feels good in our bodies to do that. And so an asexual person might just enjoy simply the sensations that happen when an orgasm happens, and that's totally valid and okay. Next up, sometimes people are just nice to look at, and the idea of sharing space and sharing, physical pleasure with a very attractive body can be totally fun. It's an aesthetic appreciation thing, but again, it's not necessarily sexual attraction. We talked about the opposite of this a little bit later, but sometimes sex can be an activity that results in emotional intimacy. And while they might not necessarily be sexually attracted to their partner, they might absolutely be willing and excited to have sex with a partner in order to build that emotional intimacy because they know that it's important for their partner. Listen, I'm just gonna say this one. Sometimes orgasms are just a really great way of relieving stress and anxiety. And so a lot of asexual people can use masturbation or other types of sexual intimacy as a way of self-regulating, as a way of calming themselves down, as a way of relaxing or unwinding after a long day. But again, doesn't necessarily have to rely on sexual attraction. I know I said this earlier, but I think it's really important to hit here again that asexuality is not a monolith. Some people who are asexual really enjoy physical sensation and pleasure in sex, and some people don't, and that is totally valid and okay. In conclusion, Quick recap. Asexual people can experience romantic attraction but not sexual attraction. Asexual people can want to have sex. Asexual people can experience different types of physical pleasure. Asexual people can also have a deep need for intimacy in their relationships. All of those things are true, regardless of where we fall personally on the spectrum of sexuality or romantic attraction. One of the most powerful things that we can do for ourselves is to get to know our bodies, get to know what we like, get to know what we dislike. This is my video, and I get to do what I want. And so I want to close by talking to my fellow asexual people out there. Listen, embrace your comfort levels. You know, embrace your boundaries and your preferences. They are valid and they are important and they are yours to define. Your experience of intimacy, your connection with intimacy is valid and important no matter what it looks like. You aren't weird, you aren't broken, and you are not alone. And to everybody else watching, understanding and respecting each other's boundaries is obviously paramount in any type of sexual or romantic relationship. And even more than that, creating spaces and conversations where asexuality is recognized and honored and validated as a real and authentic and valid sexual orientation is really, really important. And that's something that you can do not only just like here with me while you're watching these videos, but in your own life as well. As always, I want to keep the conversation going. Feel free to let me know your thoughts, your experiences, your questions, your comments, your wonderings, your musings in the comment section below. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. This has gone on so long. And also, this is really important. If you're looking for more resources or more information about asexuality or how to navigate asexual relationships, I've linked some really great resources down in the description below, so make sure to check them. And hey, this is my favorite part. If you like this video and you want to see more, you know what you gotta do. Smash that subscribe button.
Smash it!
Smash it!
With your elbow bone.
Eric's been here. He's my helper.
I've been here the whole time.
He's been here the whole time. He was pushing the button, so we say thanks, Eric.
Oh, camera 3.
Sorry, I got distracted fucking around at the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell if you want to know whenever I go, I do a thing on the internet. And if you want to see more, but in a very different context, please feel free to check out mostlypans.com. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having these conversations with me. Heads up, there are some really, really big announcements coming at the beginning of next year. But in the meantime,
check your tire pressure.
Check your tire pressure. And remember to eat a snack. Remember to take your meds. Remember to drink some water. Remember to be kind to yourself. Remember to be kind to others. And remember that we love you. Bye. Outro. I don't know what song I'm actually gonna put. I haven't downloaded the new update to the editing software. Tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la, Wondershare Filmora, that is the name. I couldn't remember the name. I couldn't remember the name.
You're still going.
Stop, turn it off.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Moving on.